Thank you very much. Well, I have to say, when I was traveling down from Manchester yesterday, I was picturing and I was visioning a very successful event in a very intimate venue. And then I get landed with the main stage, which is absolutely great, fantastic. So I'm Angeliki Stoia. I'm an associate at Arup, and I lead a team of stakeholder engagement experts. I'm based up in Manchester, and we work across the UK. So cities continue to lead the charge in terms of tackling climate change and taking the opportunity to do so by also solving complex environmental and social challenges that they're facing. And while there's a lot of focus on the development of the various business models, the policies that underpin circular economies, the importance of engaging with stakeholders, with participants, with citizens, and with people that will be required to make changes in the way that they purchase goods, changes in the way that they travel, changes in the way that they consume energy, engagement with citizens is often overlooked. So our discussion today is going to be around how do we create the environment and what is the value of creating environments for genuine discussions with citizens and stakeholders and all those who we actually need to convince, if you like, to adopt the circular actions that we expect of them. How do we engage and we really listen and we understand what are the barriers that stop people taking up the behaviors that we want? And then also, what are the reasons that some people are postponing taking action? So I'm very, very pleased to be joined by a stellar panel this afternoon. So we've got with us Dr. Kate Jackson, who's our circular economy lead at Arup. We're also joined by James Chong, which is partner and commercial director for Mamu Mani and FabLab. We've got Sam Nicholson, another fellow Mancunian. She's the managing director for the Manchester Climate Change Partnership. And then we're also joined by Councillor Peter Mason, who is the leader of the London Borough of Ealing. The slide details are up over there, and my iPad is working, so please do post your questions and your thoughts. I'm going to try and get as many in as possible. So let's start with you, Kate. There's often a lot of misunderstanding in terms of what do we mean when we talk about the circular economy. So, Kate, can you tell us what is the circular economy, and also why is it important that citizens are engaged with it?
Fantastic. Well, thank you for the introduction. It's lovely to be here with all of you here today, and I think it's such a significant event where we need to start engaging. I've talked to many other sessions about inclusiveness, collaboration, integration, and holistic systems thinking. And I think if I can get in the takeaway points at the beginning, think about that as we go through our presentations today and our discussions. But essentially, we operate currently in a very consumptive world. And I don't mean to say that in a negative way, but it's the reality. We consume a lot of things, a lot of products, and we consume materials, and we consume goods. And essentially, we operate in a take, make, and waste economy, emphasis on the waste. And traditionally, or less traditionally, it's called a linear economy. There is no necessary feedback loop there. There's no incentive to keep regenerating and bringing things and products and materials back around into circulation. There was a recent study that was done in the UK for this UK Circularity Gap report that highlighted only 7.5% of materials are recirculated and reused within the UK. I'll just pause there for one moment, because if you think what the other number is, that's a 92.5% opportunity for reusing, repurposing materials, keeping them in use, and giving longer-term value and life for those assets and materials. So what is a circular economy? A circular economy is a system. It's a change in a system shift across our society where value is not attributed to materials and products for just today. It's about the longevity of that value and sustaining that value through generations to come. We've got to think about what are the principles that we need to underpin to deliver that circular economy. And principally, it's eliminate waste and pollution, and that's across everything we're doing, all the decisions we're making, try to eliminate the waste and the pollution that we're generating from it. Keep things in use, and by that it's about recirculating everything we've got in our society as long as we possibly can, at the highest value we possibly can. And I don't just mean recycling as in reusing plastic bottles, it's actually keeping the purpose of those assets and products in their actual use for as long as possible. And the third principle is regenerate nature. And by doing that, we're actually bringing nature into the solution for our future economy and circular economy, about how we invest in looking at regenerative materials. So we're moving away from carbon-intensive concrete, for example, and think about how can we invest in alternative material use in the way we design, and actually use less materials in the way we design. Because ultimately, we do not want to continue extracting raw materials from our ground, from the planet, and actually, keeping it in a linear economy. So we want to move away from that. The outcome of that is that we will deliver a prosperous, decarbonized society where more jobs will be created because we're moving towards a more service-based economy that's going to be focused on innovative products, new services through increased logistics, and also moving towards a more digital economy, because we need to be very savvy about what products are actually in use. How do we have assurance in the built environment? How do we have assurance that secondary materials are going to withstand the purpose that they're intended for in the designs that we're going to build? So how do we deliver all of that? We mentioned at the beginning, collaboration and co-location, also the benefits about working together as an integrated society, and that involves all stakeholders. So the second point there about why should we engage with stakeholders, essentially we can't do any of the above without engagement. And engagement requires understanding, it requires ownership, and that's one thing I'd like to ask actually of the conference today is, it's about value of real estate, but what's the accountability that goes with the value we're trying to invest for today and for tomorrow? So from a circular economy perspective, it's a very positive outcome from my side, and I can't see any endless. I think the opportunities are endless. I think about 92.5% opportunity.
Fabulous. Thank you. Thank you very much, Kate. James, can you tell us a little bit about why is it important for businesses to be engaged in the circular economy? And also, can you talk to us a little bit about how you support your clients to manage ESG, their ESGs in the built environment?
Sure. Yeah, just a little bit ourselves. Honored to be here. Thank you for inviting us to be part of the panel. Yes, circularity is at the core of our business. We're like architects, fabricators, mad scientists, and technologists of material. So we're so sort of looking into these sort of issues about is there an alternative way of, in the built environment, actually minimizing material use through digital, what Kate was saying, digital fabrication. Yeah, so in terms of, we make well-considered, decision making all the way down our supply chain. So, we source fermented sugarcane to 3D print these structures, and we're working alongside Arup to test its capability at different scales, from furniture to potentially building facades in the future. Yeah, so I suppose it's an exciting time for us in the way we're exploring these innovative materials to address circularity. So it's not linear. We don't discard whatever we produce. We keep it in a circular chain. We print in fermented sugarcane or starch, and we build these amazing pavilion structures, which I'll show you later, and then we can compost it and grind it down to its constituent material, and also reprint with it, so it remains in the system. So I think that's the that's the sort of future of what we are looking at, through digital robot printing, I'd also like to say that we're working alongside Therme Group, who's one of our main sponsors, and we address one of their 3 pillars, which is about, circularity and construction, as well as food, and, did a marvelous talk about wellness before. So we really understand the issues at hand. We need to address the climate change issue. We need to reduce our carbon emissions. In the world, 36% of carbon emissions from the building trade, either built or in operation. So, our way of thinking about the world through a digital fabrication thing, addresses some of these larger issues about reducing the way that we produce buildings, our carbon footprint. What we produce is 4 times less carbon than the traditional way of producing normal plastics, petroleum plastics. As we are doing this bioplastic, which is sugarcane. Yeah. So the idea of reuse, repurpose, rebuild, taps into all the sort of ESG items that the London Mayor, who's actually linked in with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and also there's it brings off other work streams, like businesses that supply materials to us, job creations. We're based in Hackney, a manufacturing firm in Hackney. So you can understand not many firms do that. We're manufacturing locally. We're getting. We want to get supply locally. We want to get more jobs. Supply our material. We want to produce locally and deliver locally. Yeah. So I think trying to reduce our transportation requirements is also a key process in what we do. So we look through all the chain. We want to encourage people to think this way. We're inviting people to actually come to our studio to have a look at what we do, because it's really, every time I show stakeholders, they're really amazed at our robots whizzing away, our material science of what we do, the experiments that we do, the amount of R&D that we have to do, to get this off the ground. It's a fascinating. It's not boring at all. This circularity debate. Yeah. So I think. I kind of want to show you a video, yes. Which is Arthur, my partner, and is it this one? Yeah.
Autostrata's intention is to communicate a new circular way of life. It's about knowing where things come from and where they end up. This pavilion uses polylactic acid. It's material made from fermented sugar. That material can then be composted after use, but it can also be recycled after it's being used. We co-designed parametric modules that can be reused, reconfigured, with a geometry reflecting where forces need to go, further reducing the use of material through curvature and local patterning. These modules are designed to be transportable through assembly and disassembly, and maybe more importantly, the very factory that made it is mobile, can travel next to it, to print locally. Imagine a future in which we fly these factories nearby, use local materials, and send codes internationally at the speed of light to be tested and fitted in complex sites, using augmented reality to empower people and adapt and enrich our design systems. It is the return of the age of the master builders, the same iterative, collaborative, local craft that brought such sophistication as the cathedrals. This time, knowledge will be shared and accessible in our temples of circularity across the world, places where people will be able to design, grow materials, 3D print, assemble, crush, grow, all locally, in a virtuous loop that informs the wider ecosystem and brings us closer to nature. FabHub is here to reconnect all these pieces together and allow you to be involved in all of this. This is the circular way of life that we want to promote and what FabHub was created for.
All right. Well, yeah, that's us.
Fantastic. That's great. Thank you so much for bringing it to life.
Thank you. Yeah.
So behind the circular economy, Sam, there's a lot of partnerships and there is a lot of getting people together to discuss what the future is, and then also bringing their stakeholders and their citizens on board. Can you tell us a little bit about the Manchester story in the design and development of the circular economy?
Sure. Thank you, and hi everybody. Thanks for the invite. Lovely to be here in one of my favourite buildings in the country. I thought I'd highlight 3 things that are driving active participation in all things climate change up in Manchester. The golden thread is collaboration. So firstly, I'll talk about the sort of broad approach to stakeholder engagement that we have through our Climate Change Partnership. That partnership is 80 plus organisations includes the local city council, our universities, a football club you might have heard of, the airport, social housing providers, as well as then our culture sector, faith sector, health sector and community representations. Together, that partnership sets the climate change strategy for the city. It sets the targets. So from the very sort of first step, we've got that engagement of a broad range of stakeholders, a diverse range of voices in setting the targets for the city in terms of climate change. Those targets obviously include the kind of direct energy-related emissions, but they also include the broader indirect emissions and embodied carbon. Although it's a lot more difficult to capture and quantify and take action on, we recognise it's a key priority. One of the tricks that we've used within that strategy is not to talk about circular economy, sustainable consumption and production. We've kind of tried to, speak more human. So we talk about the things we buy and throw away and the food we consume or waste. I think that helps those targets and strategy to resonate more with a wider range of people. We've done, work with our universities to understand the hotspots around our indirect emissions. There's no surprises, they're really construction, obviously, food and drink, manufactured goods. And we've used those hotspots to help inform kind of what the partnership tackles and the projects that we take on. So the second thing is really one of those. As a partnership, we brought together a range of industry experts from across the built environment sector to look at how we could work with the City Council to drive up the ambition around net zero new buildings in the local plan, which is being refreshed. So it's a really collaborative approach, being led by the sort of industry sector that would have to implement such high standards, and that is also looking at not just operational but also embodied carbon in the materials and construction processes. And thirdly, coming down to the sort of residents and communities that we all are, wherever we live, we've got a large-scale community engagement programme generously funded by the Lotteries Climate Action Fund that's running for 3 years in Manchester. It's building out from a number of climate assemblies we did with local residents. And there's a few key success factors that I thought I would share. So firstly, we're delivering that in partnership with other organisations. Organisations that local communities already know and trust is a good way to get that engagement and foster those relationships. We're trying to do a bit of a step change in communications. So obviously we're using social media, but we're also doing kind of physical pop-ups and installations as a way to capture people that aren't normally involved in a climate conversation. We've got a capacity building strand so that we can help build the confidence in individuals to get involved in their communities, to take on this sort of action that they might not have done before, and to give them that ability to sort of make changes in their own life and then advocate to others to spread that behaviour change. We're including technical information about a global issue but bringing it down to a local issue, so we're doing ward level carbon footprints so residents can kind of see what's actually really happening in their neighbourhood, in their locality, and therefore that helps them to then design projects that they want to tackle. We work with them to develop those projects so we don't impose projects on. It's all community-led design. Again, that fosters more ownership and engagement and active participation, the key phrase for the day. So we've got libraries of things popping up. We've got repair cafes. We've got sewing clubs about repairing clothes. We've got local food growing happening as well as sort of broader nature-based projects. And we've got a community coalition, which is how we're trying to connect those community groups and residents to each other from the north to the south of the city and beyond. So while some of those projects might seem small in themselves, actually it's about building that from the bottom up, that active engagement and participation and ownership that means that then we've got a more sort of informed set of communities that will help us to tackle some of the much bigger issues around that circular economy change.
Fantastic, thank you, Sam. Which brings us to Peter. Peter, it'd be great to hear from you, your experience, your lessons learned, the challenges you're facing, perhaps any opportunities that you see in terms of doing on the ground. How do you bring residents on board? How do you keep residents on board? And more to the point, how do you work with residents that want you to go potentially faster and harder, but also, how do you keep those engaged that, are suffering the cost of living crisis and, tackling or being part of a circular economy is not at the forefront?
And look, and herein lies the challenge, because here we all are in this environment, and I'm sure that there's a high degree of consensus both around net zero and the circular economy. And in fact, we're living that true to ourselves in Ealing. We recently decided to stay put in our HQ rather than invest so much embedded carbon in demolishing and redoing it. And we're working on initiatives and things like Let's Go Southall, handing out thousands of reused and formerly loved bikes to the public in order to get them cycling, and therefore seeding the change that we need to see in a place that's got very low levels of active travel, or indeed shifting some of our traditional refuse sites into quite literally circular economy reuse stations. But I think we've all seen the politics play out in the last week, which is, as much as we believe that we're in a consensus amongst ourselves, the announcement by Rishi in his speech, the Prime Minister, touches on something that's viscerally out there at the moment, and that we as people who, if people know values modes, might be considered to be pioneers in this space, have to tread very carefully, which it's really difficult to hear other people evangelizing about how you need to change what you do. And that politics has been played out, not just in London around ULEZ, but indeed the language that the government are now using on things like, having to use 7 wheelie bins. Who's used 7 wheelie bins? I don't know. Or indeed the costs associated with retrofit and air and heat source pumps. And what that's doing is it's touching a visceral part of people's psychology right now in the cost of living crisis, which is seeking to use net zero and seeking to use issues around the climate crisis as a wedge issue in which they believe that they will take a political and electoral advantage. And therefore, I think we have to tread really carefully because we've seen time and again how issues like this have been weaponized as, if you like, touch points in a quite frankly, a traumatized country post-Brexit, post the pandemic, where we're feeling less in control of the things in our lives, and here come along, in the eyes of some people, a bunch of worthy do-gooders who are telling me what to do. And therefore we have to draw the lines, the very clear lines, for people who don't necessarily see what their contribution should or can be. Grew up in a council estate, right? There was not much money in the community, and we would borrow the lawnmower from the neighbour a couple of doors down. And anybody who's got an older sibling knows that hand-me-downs are just a factor of life. And drawing connections, therefore, between the things that are already happening and the small acts that people are already undertaking that are beneficial to themselves in financial and economic terms, rather than necessarily going to such huge issues as, how somebody who is working 2 jobs with a family who needs to get from A to B and, is working sort of paycheck to paycheck each month is expected to somehow change the world. You're not thinking about your altruistic contribution to the climate crisis if you've got other priorities in your life. And therefore, it's so important that we stay focused on making sure that we assist and help people, not just in understanding the small contributions that we can make, but also the structural nudges that we can take along too. And there's also a warning to some of us in the space that you might consider to be sort of very pioneering, that actually we can take it too far. We can take it too far in our advocacy and in our fundamentalism and our purism in some spaces that can absolutely alienate people from wanting to take those small steps. So, and that I think you have seen played out across London's politics, but I think increasingly as we enter into a period of a general election where these types of issues are probably going to be weaponised even further, there's a real risk that we lose the gains that are currently made in a consensus that has gradually been developed over time.
Fabulous, thank you. So we've got a number of questions here, and I'm going to start with just throwing in a couple and opening up to anyone who would like to contribute. First of all, it would be great if we can explain to the audience what is the difference between recycling and reuse. So specifically, it was mentioned the concrete as carbon-intensive material, but isn't a significant majority of the concrete, for example, currently being reused. And the other question, again, slightly sort of different, a little bit wider, what are the economic ideas that make you feel confident or more hopeful about the future of circular economy? So, for example, the donut economics, is this something that features in your thinking, and how does it fit?
Shall I take the start of that question and pass it through the... So the comment about reuse and recycle. So recycle, in the sense of there's a series of R words that we can start to kind of spout out, but essentially there's a hierarchy, and the best opportunity is to rethink at the beginning of either design cycles or lifestyle choices about, do we need to buy something? Do we need to build something? Do we need something in the first place? Could we just socially engineer something else that's more creative, that's less consumptive of materials and therefore less carbon impacts, etc.? So, you know, borrowing products as a service. Can we actually borrow stuff? Can we have more service-based economy so we're not using more materials and more products? The bottom end is basically, apart from landfill, then it's called refuse, because you can't do anything, so you either burn it or it's in a landfill site. The next one up on the ladder is recycle. So if you think of our traditional domestic waste, we are literally just recycling cardboard or plastics through our domestic lives. But that's going to go back in, it's going to go back to a material form that's going to get reformed into another plastic product or another cardboard product. Reuse is more about the next level up in terms of hierarchy of value. So you're going to reuse it as its purpose is. So it's linking about reusing in its existing state, but maybe if it's a critical piece of equipment, you're going to have it reused maybe in a less critical application. So if you're in terms of failure rates, etc., of different types of assets, it still has life in it, but we want to exchange it for something else, a bit that's got more reliability. So maybe you reuse it in a less critical environment. So that's kind of a small example. I think the concrete, would you like to take the concrete question?
Yeah, I'll try.
Or build on it.
I'll build on it, yeah. So it's interesting. We had a concrete discussion just before, didn't we? So a lot of people have actually asked us whether we could reprint various things in concrete. You know, so actually get the crushed material and actually put it with slurry and things like that. You know, and actually reprint with it. Yeah. So we are, looking at different types of, like I said, we're a bit of a mad material scientist lab, actually, working alongside Arup to look at the potential of reusing various materials like concrete, and a lot of research has gone into our polylactic acid reuse. Obviously, looking at the fireproofing, looking at the structural strengths, so our main funder, Therme, has actually asked us to look at these types of materials. Can we reuse concrete? A significant part of it, probably not all of it, but a significant part of it, to combine it with something, to reprint with it, or at the end of life you can crush it down, type of thing. We're at the forefront of trying to understand how we can reuse all materials. Obviously, there is this thing of reusing old bricks and things like that. Obviously, you have to characterize each brick for its structural strength, and but yeah, we're entering an age where we just cannot discard the materials. The materials are seen as an asset. Like for instance, the recycling of steel. I think we're actually analysing. Can these materials have another life? In a more a holistic way and a rational way, by minimizing our material resources, So I think we're entering a new dawn, actually, by looking at these materials. And it's exciting that we're actually at the forefront of looking at these things, So, it'll be very interesting what comes out of it, I think. Yeah.
Okay, so just going to the question around the wider economics and, for example, the donut economy or, the 15-minute neighborhoods and all the different initiatives. How do they land with the communities? How do they inspire you for sort of all of these new ideas that are coming out? Do people engage with them? Do stakeholders engage on the ground? Are they understood?
Shall I go?
Go for it, yeah, absolutely.
I think that in probably small pockets of communities, those kind of big picture ideas are well understood. Did the question start with the kind of what are you optimistic about, though? And I think for me, I've spent the last 25 or so years working with businesses around trying to sort of encourage them to be more resource efficient, trying to plug the kind of, the business benefits, not necessarily the climate benefits. And it's been generally an uphill struggle. But I think over the last 5 years, there is a real kind of noticeable, tangible culture shift there, where companies are understanding that materials have costs and energy has cost. And, actually young people coming into the market want to work for companies with positive climate credentials. And so what was feeling for a very long time like an uphill struggle actually feels like there's now momentum. So I'm really optimistic about that. The change is happening, the ball is rolling, and there's more people sort of behind it now. And businesses are seeing it more as business as usual to think about this for any number of reasons, whether it's just from a kind of operational efficiency or a talent retention or market differentiation. All of those sort of different drivers are working, it feels.
So what would I say? So I think sort of outside a small group of like retired town planners who come to an awful lot of the public meetings and sit in the galleries of our committee meetings, I don't think anybody really gets 15-minute cities, the circular economy, donut economics. It's an intellectual world that I think sort of a lot of us operate in. But the fundamental truth is, switch your brains off from your day job. What do you want in life? You want a decent living income, a genuinely affordable home, and you want your kids to get a decent education. You want your parents to grow old in a sense of safety and security, and you want to have identity and pride and a degree of love for the community that you live in. And that's the fundamental sort of central principle that I think we return to. Now, in a city like London, that's incredibly difficult because we are such a mobile city that's so huge and in many ways disconnected. And certainly pre-pandemic, there we are expending huge amounts of carbon and energy, all getting onto hugely expensive pieces of infrastructure that are all sending land values skyrocketing and perpetuating some of the challenges that we find ourselves in. But we're disconnected from the communities that we're in. You could make an argument, and I certainly make the argument, that sense of social solidarity was rebuilt during COVID. The WhatsApp groups of neighbours sprung up, and a degree of care and attention increased for the people who were in your immediate environment, in your immediate neighbourhood. And you ask the average Londoner where they live, not unless they're London, they're probably going to orient themselves around the tube station that they live at or their nearest point of contact to a high street. And therefore, reinforcing that sense of social solidarity and reconnecting communities with each other is such an important building block before we can even get on to questions of asking people to behave in different ways or nudging them through the services that are delivered through local government, or indeed the way that business and industry respond to waste minimisation and waste diversion, in order that these challenges don't become the altruistic, don't become the sort of the thing that we do in addition to everything else that we're having to struggle with, but they become the natural option. It should be the case that I can get, top quality public transport, whether that's active travel or not, it should be the case that recycling and waste diversion is just the easiest thing in the world. It should be the case that if I need to borrow a lawnmower or a hedge trimmer or any of these other bits of kit that otherwise would be sitting in an attic or in the shed at the bottom of the garden, that they're immediately available to me and that I have people around me who have the ability to support me to do that. But that also it shouldn't be a chore. You know, if I have grown up on hand-me-downs, then it's actually quite nice to get something fresh out the box every once in a while. And the challenge shouldn't therefore be, let's not have something fresh out the box, but let's look at the materials that are making the thing that's in the box. And you know, if anybody's not yet been to the Creative Enterprise Zone in Park Royal that Ealing and the GLA and OPDC are working on together, we've got this incredible set of artists working in an industrial estate where you've got sawdust and chippings and all manner of interesting waste byproducts that are being produced by the industries around them. And you've got creatives who approach the world through the prism of feeling and emotion and their engagement with the world. And they're coming up with not just art, but incredible new products and innovations that are shifting the way that we think about the bits of glass that get broken when window panes are constructed and blown, or as I say, the sawdust that comes off of wood finishing and wood furnishings. So it's all possible and it's out there, but I think it fundamentally comes back to that principle that we have to deal with the world as it is, not how we wish it to be, and that has to start with the person at the centre of this who has to make very rational decisions about things that they do in their life. And expecting them to behave in a different way because there's this huge climate crisis out there, that's not going to get us the systemic change in the system that we need to see.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. We seem to have a number of questions around recycling textiles and clothing, so I'm going to just read out a couple. Sana says, recycling textiles and clothes seems to be left to Scope and to Salvation Army at the moment, and the clothes immediately deteriorate in value once they're located in their bins. Another one is, there is one around, hold on a minute, the role of the local authorities potentially have in this space. So could you see a future where each local authority can provide a large form of place where clothes can be brought for exchange of others and or sold at a small price? Have you got any sort of examples around that?
Could I just add a bit on that one? So in terms of clothes, I don't know, I guess I've kind of just been a circular economist. It was a phrase that's obviously kind of banded around quite widely now. And essentially circular economy is something that, a concept that's been brought to life through Ellen MacArthur Foundation from 2010. So that's where it originated from, and that's why it's very socially acceptable and now into all of our politics and policies we're doing now. But essentially, the transition that the fast-moving consumer goods, and we'll take clothing example, has been on is the ultimate challenge of cost, supply chain issues, the fact they are very carbon-intensive processes. They need to drive down carbon. Their investors need to kind of see a return on how they're delivering their ESG credentials. So they want to have businesses that are actually ethical, responsible, and they want to show how they're delivering value for their communities. I would challenge the point that it's only Scope in the charity sector that are actually going to be looking at recycling clothes. In effect, they're actually going to lose right now. M&S, Zara, all of the mainstream shops are taking clothes back now. You can literally walk in, take your old clothes back. They will take any brand of clothes back because their supply chain is now incentivized to take existing clothes for reuse and remanufacture. So if you look around shops now, if you actually inspect the labels, which I do on a regular basis, and I only genuinely buy natural products, whether it's wool, cotton, sourced ethically and responsibly, or reprocessed and repurposed polyester, or whatever it would be, viscose. But it'll clearly say, and there's loads of ethical branding now that absolutely clearly mark that, and all of the clothing chains are actually appointing specific roles in their businesses, so if you've fat face, etc. Head of sustainability, absolutely all their clothing has to have a source to origin, B Corp kind of registration now. So I would say in this equation that we're talking about now, the charity section are actually going to start to see potentially less clothes coming through. Vintage is another thing online. Lots of younger generations are now engaging that positively. The behaviour shift in terms of economy and stakeholders generally, but the younger generations are engaging in this. They're seeing a win-win. They make money online because they can sell secondary materials really quickly. They're making money. The high street is traditionally set up for potentially our generations. We enjoy shopping in the high street. We go around, purchase new goods. They may be recycled, they may be repurposed, but generally they're probably new. But the new generations coming through are seeing a different kind of world, what they could benefit on. I mean, I stayed in Shoreditch last night in a hotel, and next to where I stayed was a shop selling old football shirts, actually. And I thought, wow, it never occurred to me that football shorts hold a value, and they were selling for £300 odd. But side to side where I was staying in Shoreditch, there were homeless people in an area that the bins hadn't been collected. I'm probably going into politics now in terms of from London Boroughs. But there was obviously strikes going on, the bins weren't being emptied, there was waste everywhere. And you've got such a fractured society now that actually the reuse economy has a huge role to play to bring people back into society that are maybe marginalised, give them opportunities either in low-skilled work or opportunities to bring value back in, from any products and services. But then equally the highly skilled in terms of digitalisation and a new technology, the new innovative ways of doing things in a less carbon-intensive, resource extractive way. So we need to think differently. And I think that business model about incentivising reuse, whether it's clothing or otherwise, it's a mindset shift and a cultural shift. And almost without realising, stakeholders are tuning into a new way of working in a systems, service-based circular economy. So I'll pass it.
Okay. Any other volunteers on close? Because I have a question for all of the panel that has been put forward by Gonzalo. So the question is, building public awareness bottom-up seems to be the right way. How can we channel that effort? What are your ideas that we can use to influence beyond the local level at higher political levels and presumably the one that you spoke about after your introduction?
What was the first bit? What was the opening part of that question?
Oops, I've locked my iPad. Hold on a minute.
We were listening, weren't we?
No, I think I couldn't quite hear.
Okay. Building public awareness from bottom up seems to be the way to go. How can we channel that effort to influence beyond the local level at higher political levels?
So I think, again, it's that I think we have to step out of ourselves for a second and realise that, we are in a room full of people who who are invested in this for lots of different reasons, but that the world is a big, complex place full of people who have for decades been bombarded with marketing to consume and have been inculcated into a disposable economy. And there's a whole industry out there called marketing that's been, running that show for a very, very long time. So unlearning some of those behaviours, whilst that behaviour is still ongoing, is going to be difficult and it's going to be complex, and particularly as the political environment seeks to use some of these issues as a way of absolving us collectively and individually for making some of those changes that we need to make. But ultimately, this isn't going to be solved with statements of intent and declarations of need. It's going to be changed by like a million acts of love and kindness and physical change that are going to help people orient themselves around a better and different way of doing things. So, so often is the case that, particularly in parts of elements of progressive politics, we're actually quite bad at sort of focusing too much on the altruistic and the big idea, when actually we just need to get at the ground level and we need to encourage people and have conversations, in communities, face to face. The idea of social proof is usually you would take your cue from what people are doing around you, that you would want to do the norm. And anybody who's read anything about nudge theory and the behavioural insights team who are sending letters out in the context of council tax collection is that 98% of your neighbours pay their council tax by direct debit, right? You should too. There are social cues that we take from each other, whether we do that in the old way of talking over the fence as neighbours to each other about the things that were happening in our community, or increasingly as that identity takes a digital footprint, as we are able to connect to each other in ways that we were never able to connect to before. But that's 1,000 acts of conversation and engagement. I think we've got to be really careful to turn this too much, as I say, into this statement of intent, this pledge that we must all sign up to because it's the right thing to do. Well, the right thing to do for, as I say, an individual who is facing a cost of living crisis and is being asked to do all these different things in their life, to buy a new car, to not consume in the way that they currently consume. Yes, there need to be behavioural changes and people need to think about how they do things differently, but we also need to structure the economy in such a way that it becomes the natural norm. It becomes an easy choice to make. Mm-hmm. Because given the choice, people are always going to do the easier, cheaper, faster. They're always going to take that option, and that's on us to adjust the way that we think and the way that we structure what we deliver.
So I think it's important that we're very clear about where is the agency for action. Where is it that we as individuals can actually make changes in our lives? That's great, but it goes to a certain point. Then where is it that actually the local authority holds the responsibility to make changes in planning policy, or where local businesses can make changes? And then what is it that we actually need national government to do? So being really clear about who has what in their direct control, I think helps people to understand that they're not being asked to tackle the entire problem and that everyone has their own part to play.
Mm-hmm. Anybody with further thoughts?
I think circular economy is easier, cheaper and more cost effective. So I don't think we should not be doing it because we're doing it all. I think we'll be doing it almost by default because we're moving in the right direction for it. So whether it's clothes or choosing the right kind of products that are more easier obtainable or can be reused and repurposed, or moving towards a sharing economy or sharing and service-based economy, it's a win-win because we're offsetting the outlay of the capital cost to a slightly longer term but operational cost that can be potentially more affordable as we move forward across society, across all aspects.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining our panel and for sharing your thoughts. And thank you very much to the audience for attending and for your questions. Thank you.